Welcome back to the Exalted Podcast. I am so excited to have Chad Goring here with me today. Did I say your last name correctly?
You did. You got it
Okay,
right.
perfect. Chad is the director of Renew Hope, which is a nonprofit providing sex trafficking awareness, education, and life recovery services for trafficking survivors. And if you've been following me for a while, you know that this is an area that I am super passionate about and never will stop talking about it because people need to know what a big problem it is. And if you're anything like me and maybe you're new to this, I used to believe years ago that this was a third world problem. This was a southern states problem only that had, like access. And it is very much alive and happening right here in Minnesota, Chad. Is that correct?
That's right. Yep.
Yeah. Can you give some stats quickly on like what you guys are seeing?
Sure. I think I'll give you the ones that matter the most to
Yeah.
me as I'm sort of thinking through it. So um, it used to be thought, as you said, that trafficking was more of a global issue, that it was more like
Right.
coming into the United States from other countries.
Right.
Over 60% of all trafficking in the United States is now domestic. So it's really, these are homegrown kids and young adults that are entering into the traffic realm that are born and raised right here in the United States. So it is
Right.
no longer an international problem when it comes to getting, girls or even boys for that matter, trafficked from other countries into the United States. So that's a pretty big one to understand. And that number, by the way, is growing. And the
Yeah.
reason for that is because it's just become aware to the traffickers that trafficking, or that getting product, as they call it, or new
Right.
product, as they would call it, is easier here locally and in the United States than it is to try to actually transport them in from outside the United
From third
States.
world
So,
countries.
which is
Yeah.
really sad if you think about how heartbreaking that is, that it's actually easier for them to get them here than it is to go someplace else to get them. It means we're probably pretty broken here in the United States right now, that we're producing enough kids who are susceptible and vulnerable to this type of activity. But
Yeah.
so yeah, that's one of the biggest ones. In the country, the average age of entry into the sex trafficking world is 14 years old. And in Minnesota, it's actually 13 years old. So we know that, that average age is pretty darn young, getting introduced into
Yeah.
trafficking at that particular point. And again, it's a heartbreaking type of a situation, but it's real, and we have to
Right.
deal with the real, right? So,
Right.
so yeah, those are kind of the two that are really big for me, is just to
Yeah.
understand how those two statistics work, because it really does play into the local side of it.
Absolutely. And then I think another common misconception is that it's like, the movie Taken, where, these girls or boys are kidnapped and they're taken away from their family, which it can happen, but
Right.
that's actually less rare than how it usually goes down. Can you give us
Yeah.
a scenario of what this could look like?
Yeah, it is rare that is how it happens. The real scenario, and it can really have a lot of different forms, Jen, to be honest.
Right.
But I would say that the women that we have worked with now, our organization Renew Hope does not work with youth. We work with adults, and I can kind of explain why
Yeah.
maybe a little bit later. But for the purpose of your question, the what's important to know is that kids experience trauma at a young age most of the time. Like these kids that are getting into trafficking, somehow they're getting pulled in, they're experiencing trauma at a young age. They were either sexually abused, verbally abused,
Right.
but usually even more than a verbal abuse situation. It's sexually or physically abused as a young kid, which puts them automatically into this completely different posture when it comes to dealing with life, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of those kids end up being either kicked out of their house, leaving their house, they're in broken families. A lot of them have drug and alcohol related issues in their families. And so it's these are real broken sort of family situations. And then they find themselves out of their house. So they're looking for ways to supply for their life. They're looking
Right.
for places to live, places to get money, places to eat. That creates this massive vulnerability for
Right.
exploitation.
Probably looking
Um,
for like love and attention too.
yeah, and then you couple all the emotional issues like you just described
Yeah.
into that, and it creates almost this like hyper exploitable situation for most of these kids. And so
Yeah.
that's the story for most of the women that we deal with at Renew Hope, which is they were in one of those vulnerable situations. They were promised something. They were lured in by the promise of a better life or money or
Mhm.
opportunity or security or, as you said, love and affection and attention. And they got lured in, and it turned into something really dark.
Right.
So that's how most of it happens. Are you familiar with the term boyfriending?
Yes. Yeah. Why don't you explain it for
So
our listeners though?
yeah, for the sake of your audience, basically, boyfriending is just a tactic that traffickers will use. Either they themselves or they will hire young boys to go out and they'll teach them to look for the signs of a vulnerable
Yeah.
young girl in their schools, even heads down, sort of disconnected from the rest of the social dynamic that's within their school system or
Hmm.
their age group. And they will reach out to them and promise them all sorts of things. They'll take them out, buy them dinners. They'll get their story. They'll go on social media and they'll see what kind of stuff they're posting on social media. Then they will basically wine and dine them. They
Right.
will buy them nice stuff, make them feel like they're loved, and make them feel like they're $1 million. And pretty soon a decision is offered to them. Do you want to stay with your horrible family and your parents who don't like you and treat you poorly or don't
Right.
care, and come with me? Or do you want me because I have to go? Are you going to come with me? And that's often the story. So that's called
Right.
boyfriending. It's a tactic, an actual tactic. If you actually go and look at the Netflix series on Jeffrey Epstein, you'll see that that is a tactic that was used. If it wasn't the lure um, of money or security, it was the lure of scholarships, and it was the
Yeah.
lure of education or a really good job and a career that they're passionate about.
Right.
So it's anytime that we have attachments, we have ways to be exploited, and that's part of how boyfriending works.
Yeah. And it's just, I mean, it can happen in any walk of life. I've met a few survivors now, and people were lured in by, working on a yacht for a summer, and you'll just have to do a little bit of cooking and cleaning. And before they know it, they are full on, having to service these clients and trapped and no
Yeah,
way out and just things like that. Which the grooming process is just, they're very good at it,
yeah,
and they're usually very charming. And so it's so important that we know that those signs are, and sometimes I've heard of cases where these girls are still living at home, but they're just living in a situation where there's a lot of neglect, but they don't know how to get out of the situation, right?
yeah. You're exactly right. If you go back to that whole idea of hyper exploitation, or who's really exploitable
Yeah.
is the vulnerable. My friend Stephanie Page will say, who hasn't been vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at these young girls or boys that are out there right now, and they're feeling all of the same things that we felt when we were young kids,
Right.
right? Left out, feeling like, they don't fit in. They're looking for that one thing that's going to help them identify as being special or whatever it may be. That creates that vulnerability. So kids living at home can be trafficked by other
Mhm.
parties that are outside of it as ways of making money or ways of gaining friendship or getting attention from the people that they're being trafficked by or whatever it might be. It's a
Right.
sad situation, but it does happen. And it usually does happen in homes where the parents, to be real honest, don't have as much of a clue, right? They're not
Yeah.
really dialed in on their kid, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I know that's how you are with your kids. That's how I am with my kids. We're hyper vigilant about just being in their life, right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
so I would like to think that the chances of one of our kids getting swept into that is pretty low because of that.
Right.
But when you have a kid who doesn't have that
Hmm.
at home and has a lot more free reign
Yeah.
with their time and their locations,
Yeah.
their geography, it can be rough.
It can be rough. Yeah. And I've even, heard of cases where these, and we're using the term women or girls because that is the most common, but this absolutely happens to boys as well. So I'm not neglecting that, but I've heard of cases where these people that are being victimized are so brainwashed that they're invested in it. They
Yeah.
they they don't understand what's happening to them because they've been so brainwashed that they're proud to work for their pimp, or they're proud to be doing what they're doing. And that's not every single case, but so often people are like, well, why don't they just run away, or why don't they just, escape? And a lot of times they don't want to. This is where they're getting their sense of belonging because they are that brainwashed. Have you
Yeah.
guys seen that with Renew Hope?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's often deep into the process before some women, and because we work with women, I'll refer to them as women, but
Yes.
before some women even grasp the idea that they were actually coerced and manipulated into doing what they
Mhm.
were doing. Many of them will say, well, no, I did this by my choice. Here
Right.
were the reasons that I did this reason, this reason, this reason. But
Right.
when you say, well, how did you get to that choice? And then and you can ask the question, what was going on in you that made you think this was a good idea? Well, I met this guy and we were doing this, and it was like, oh my gosh, I really didn't have a choice.
Yeah.
At
I was
some point, I was
brainwashed into this.
manipulated into this. And, there's a freedom that comes along with understanding that,
Yeah.
but then you got to get past it, right? Because our idea is to stay out of victimhood. But yeah, I get that a lot. I get
Mhm.
that question a lot. Like, why don't they just leave?
Yeah.
And they're not often held in like prison like environments, right?
Right.
That's not how it works. But they are held in these mental prisons
Mhm.
where they've been manipulated to the point where they believe they have zero value outside of that situation.
Right.
They have zero value in the world. They have no reason to believe they should get anything better than what they have. So their self-value has often been so chipped down that they really don't see any way that anybody else would love them or care for them the same way that their quote unquote handler or trafficker is handling them. And
Right.
even when they're pulled out of those situations, like in our case, if they were landed at Renew Hope or in a law enforcement type of a situation where they get pulled out of a sting operation of some kind,
Yeah.
they are very resistant to police because they've been trained
Yeah.
to be resistant to police. And they often do have an emotional attachment to their traffickers.
Right.
So they're very resistant to being pulled out of those situations because of that exact scenario.
Yeah. And I've even
The,
heard of women being rescued and then returning because
Mhm.
by their own free will, because they've been so brainwashed to believe that the path, that's the only place that they belong.
You got it. And I think the natural tendency for a lot of us, and I'll confess, I was probably in this camp too before I got more knowledgeable on the issue,
Yeah.
is that, well, hey, if we pulled them out and we got them a little bit of help and they decided to go back, I mean, that's kind of on them, right?
Yeah.
That's how we think. And
Hmm.
but I've now understand on a much higher level that it's still them being in prison.
Yeah.
They're
Hmm.
still just thinking like a prisoner,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
And so it takes time.
Yeah.
Um, Real quickly, if I could just talk about an article I read several months back, talks
Yeah.
about the specific, or what this article called the special kind of abuse that
Mm.
trafficked victims have endured. We often think of the worst kinds of abuse like child abuse and those kind of things, and all of that obviously is heinous and
Yeah.
gross and but trafficking victims have endured a special kind of abuse in that it has not just been once, twice, three times, or 10 times. It's literally been hundreds and hundreds and sometimes thousands of
Right.
times that
Hmm.
the abuse has happened by not just one or two abusers,
Right.
but by hundreds and hundreds of different abusers over the course of time.
Right.
So you think about what that does to the psyche of a human being
Right.
and a child or a young person who's trying to protect themselves emotionally
Yeah.
is they're going to get hard.
Yeah.
They're going to get hard, and they're going to see life from a very different perspective. And they're going to make decisions in their life out of that perspective,
Right.
not out of the perspective of like you or I or somebody who has a relatively healthy outlook on life
Right.
would make. It's a completely different mindset. So the question is, do we just let them go back and say, well, it's on you now?
Yeah.
Or do we say, no, you're still thinking like a prisoner, and that means you just need to get healthy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. That's so good. Well, let's switch to the healthy side of it, because this is part
Yeah.
of your mission, is
Yeah.
rehabilitating these women that have been rescued or left, or a safe place to go. A lot of them don't have other job skills. They don't have other life skills. So why don't you tell them a little bit about your mission at Renew Hope?
Yeah. So at Renew Hope, our mission is to really, it's twofold. It's to raise awareness on this issue, and thanks
Right.
to you, we're getting to do more and more of that, um, and others, obviously. It's to raise awareness of it, to let people
Mhm.
know, to answer those questions, to dispel those myths that people do have
Right.
about the world of trafficking, and in particular, help them understand trafficking is real right here in Minnesota. It's a
Yes.
real problem.
Yes.
The second aspect of that is what we call survivor life recovery. So we're providing what's typically called in the industry aftercare services for survivors. And we're doing that in two different ways. Through mentorship, we launched a first of its kind mentorship program here in Minnesota just recently, where we're connecting our certified trained mentors up with mentees. These are survivors
Mhm.
that could be anywhere, um, in other programs. So something to know about survivors in the trafficking world is they often bounce from place to place to place to place to place because
Sure.
they've, like you said, they've never been taught how to actually like figure it out outside of the
Right.
trafficking world.
Right.
So they're taking everything that's given to them, which is usually shelters or sometimes an aftercare program, or an abused women shelters will often take trafficked women in, because they've been abused in their relationships as well.
Yeah.
But they don't address the trafficking issues, right? They
Right.
don't address that special kind of abuse that goes to that. So that's really our mission. Our mission is raise awareness on this issue, especially locally, and provide aftercare services to women who really want to get better. And
Yeah.
so the second way that we do that is we have a home we call the Amberella House, and it's a home. It's more of a deep dive place where 4 to 5 women at a time can come and get, and they live there um, in a much more submersive environment where they get professional level counseling. We're getting life skill development. We're helping them enroll in getting their GEDs, enroll in college, think about a life, a future, those kind of
Yeah.
things. And we do that in our mentorship program too, but we can do it in a much more concentrated effort with the house. Unfortunately, right now the house is on pause. We've had to pause operations from a financial standpoint because 2020 did a kind of a number on us,
Yeah. Yeah.
like it did with a ton of small nonprofits. So we're just rebuilding that and eager to get that up and running again.
Yeah. So what does that look like? What do you need to get that up and running again? How can people help?
Well, the single biggest thing that we could use are monthly donors, just folks that could give $25 a month, to what we're doing. That'll help build that base and provide that monthly ongoing sort of income
Yeah.
that comes out of that. So if there's folks out there that this is beating their heart a little bit and they're wanting to maybe get involved in trafficking for the first time and make a difference, our our motto is that we help people like you make a difference in the battle
Yeah.
against sex trafficking.
Yeah.
So uh, so that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to host an event with your sphere of influence in your church, or that. And by say event, I don't mean like, big giant things that take months and months to
Right.
plan.
Right.
We have these things we call stage events. So stage stands for sex trafficking awareness, guidance, and education, and they're about an hour long. They can sometimes go a little longer with Q&A. They can be a little shorter if it's a larger group and you're on a tighter timeline. But we basically do like a sex trafficking 101 to raise the
Mm.
awareness, sort of raise the temperature of awareness, about trafficking locally and get people to start thinking about it a little bit.
Yeah.
And then if they want to get involved in any way, in, as a volunteer, get involved in the fundraising, become a donor, there's lots of different ways that they can be involved. We then give them those options as to how they can connect with our group. And then obviously if there's other groups out there too that they could be connected to as well. We're not the only game in town. But we are the only ones doing this mentorship program right now, which is gaining so much traction.
Yeah, that's so good. And I mean, survivors really need to have a way to rebuild that mental prison that we talked about, because I can't imagine that the mindset that goes along with that kind of abuse for that long period of time, right?
You got it. That's
Yeah.
exactly why that program is so vital.
Yeah. So I know we have to respect some of the survivors that have come through your path, but do you have any stories that you could share with us? Stories of redemption, of course, of people that are just, that have been rescued or have survived and are making a way for themselves now.
Yeah, let me tell you two quick ones. So the first story is not so much a story of redemption,
Sure.
but a story of heartbreak.
Okay.
And obviously in the trafficking world is filled with heartbreak, but this was just like a special kind of heartbreak for us. About a year ago, we got a call from northern Minnesota. It was a shelter, it was a youth shelter in
Mhm.
northern Minnesota. Reached out and said, we've got a young girl here and we know her. She's familiar to us. And but we can no longer take her because she turned 18.
Okay.
And they would lose their funding if they take anybody in who's over the age of 18, because that's how they
Sure.
were getting their funding.
Mhm.
Do you have a bed? She's been trafficked by her mother, who had a
Mm.
drug problem, and by an uncle, I think it was an uncle, who also had a drug problem. And she had been sold since the age of 15. She'd now turned 18. And they were looking for a bed. They call them a bed when they're just looking to place somebody.
Sure.
And so we were like, yes, we will come and get her.
Mhm.
So our headquarters is in Wyoming, Minnesota, the great metropolis of Wyoming, Minnesota. Um, and so we were willing to go get her. They set the phone down or put us on hold, and they came back and said, we can't find her. She left. And so the heartbreak of that is it took a matter of 5 minutes on the phone for us to attach our heart to this young lady,
Yeah.
knowing her story and knowing that we are equipped with the resources to help her
Yeah.
start the process of overcoming, and then missing that opportunity in that instant was just so heartbreaking. And then to think of how many others are just like that, just
Yeah.
turned 18, all the resources have dried up, because when you turn 18, and really anywhere in the country, but especially here in Minnesota, that's where all the resources are devoted, is to
Sure.
under 18, which is why we work with adult women, because that's such a huge need. Um, just to think of all of those other young girls out there that are in that situation, and to know that it's likely that this 18-year-old girl is, her emotional growth is probably stunted right around 13, 14 years old or younger.
Sure. Yeah.
So she's not truly an adult in that sense.
Yeah.
But she is by age, and that's what cuts it off. So anyway, that's the heartbreak of what we do. We see that on a regular basis, that we miss out on those opportunities to really help out because of circumstances or something happens. And boy, that is so hard. Then there's the sort of amazing story of Ashley. Ashley is a young girl who was trafficked from a younger age, and came to us by way of from California to St. Paul to us, and entered into the program with this desire to get out of the life,
Yeah.
wanted to be out of it. She was at that point now, she'd figured out it was a lie,
Sure.
and she wanted to get out of it. She was one of those who didn't really recognize even that she had been manipulated and coerced into doing all of these things that she was doing. It wasn't necessarily by her choice, although she thought it was
Sure.
there. She went through our program. She was mentored directly by Julie Good, who is our program director at Renew Hope. and over a period of time went in to get a job, ended up working 3 jobs at one point, whittled it down to 2 jobs, and then finally down to 1 full-time job, going to school to get her degree in nutrition, and this vibrant, passionate young lady who really came to blossom. She came to faith in Christ before that she had come to us. And I think that was a big advantage for her to be able to embrace our program.
Yeah.
But she just recently took the next step of her journey and is now living on her own. And she moved to Texas, where she's getting a job at a hospital in Texas. And she's kind of starting her journey to be able for self-sustaining and all of those different things that are there. We continue to mentor her, by the way.
Yeah.
We continue to mentor her while she's in Texas, because we have that, obviously that capability to do that these days. So
yeah, that's
yeah,
incredible.
it happens. It can happen. Lives can turn around. Lives can be changed. You know what I mean? We just look at it like no one ever deserves to just be tossed to the side because of how their life took, the twists and turns that their life took when they were younger.
Oh my goodness. What a mission that you guys are on. Like, oh, thank you for sharing that story. And just, every life does matter, no matter what the past has looked like, right? Just
That's right.
That's a love like Jesus right there. That's what that is.
That is.
And now let's talk about your sorry to switch gears on you so fast, but I'm excited to talk about this Live Life, Give Life campaign that you guys have got going on. And that includes a podcast, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, for sure. Live Life, Give Life is it is a campaign of sorts. And it is really kind of the theme by which we are rolling as an organization. What we found is that so many people don't know about trafficking, even in this day and age. Like the nuggets that we've discussed in this podcast interview, whatever you call it, conversation between friends, people are shocked by the things that we've said, right? They had no idea. They had no idea that trafficking not only happens in Minnesota, but it's happening right there in their community. There's not one county in the state of Minnesota who hasn't had a case. And if there's cases, there's activity, right?
Right.
And so Live Life, Give Life is all about living your life in such a way to where you are living an inspired existence. You're doing something that is inspiring you on a regular basis. And by doing something that's inspiring you, you now have this thing in you that can overflow and make a difference in the life of someone who doesn't have the opportunity to have that same inspired life, like someone who's trafficked, right? So that's the overall concept of Live Life, Give Life. The Live Life side of that is about figuring out what inspires you and figuring out what holds you back from living this full and complete life, right? What's holding you back from doing that? What inspires you to do that? The Give Life side of it is choosing an avenue that you look at and say, those folks don't have what I have. Maybe I don't have a lot. Maybe I have a ton, but I know those folks don't have what I have.
Yeah.
They've not been given the opportunities that I've been given or the chance to even decide to live this inspired full life, right? And so I'm going to do something to make a difference for that group of people. So the way this translates in the practical is we have a podcast that we launched. We're almost 4 episodes into the podcast now. And it's picking up steam, which is great. You can find it on all of the major podcast things now, all the different listings, Apple and those kind of things. You'll want to search probably on my name right now because it's not, we don't have that many episodes. So if you search on Chad Goehring, that's Goehring, that's the fastest way that it'll come up. You can also search on Renew Hope, but there's a lot of Renew Hope stuff that's out there and that might get a little confusing.
Yeah, I'll definitely link it in the show notes too.
That'd be great.
You can find it easily.
That'd be awesome. I appreciate that. And then in addition to that, we have Live Life, Give Life events that we are going to be running, which is really cool because what we're looking for there are what we call enthusiasts, people who are passionate about a specific type of activity. That might be skiing, that might be bicycling, it could be riding Harleys or whatever it is. It could be cribbage for all, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's something that they are excited about. They love doing, and that there's other people that if they jump in on that would love doing it. So let me give an example. We are doing a polar, we can't call it a polar plunge, but it's like a winter plunge, right? So
Sure.
really stupid people are going to be jumping into an ice cold lake in a couple of weeks, and they're helping to raise money to do that, but they're doing something that's inspiring them, right? It's
Yeah.
getting them out and doing something crazy and fun, and do that. Like I said, that could be getting in a cribbage into a cribbage tournament, or doing something like that. So we're looking
Love
for
it.
these enthusiasts to help us run these events. And then we provide all of the infrastructure to register and organize and fundraise for the events. And those fundraisers obviously go to help us bring the house back up to full activity.
Yes.
And then also in the mentorship program and all of our other activities that we've got going on at Renew Hope. So the fundraising, it becomes a fundraiser, but it's also an awareness event, because so many people in that process get to know Renew Hope and the issue of trafficking that they never knew before. So
Yes.
the events are a really big part of Live Life, Give Life. So there's the podcast, and then there's the events that are happening, and it's all picking up steam, which is really a lot of fun.
Love it. Love it. And if somebody listening is excited about maybe their own enthusiast activity, where can they
Yeah,
find you or information on it?
absolutely. So if they go to renewhopenow.org, that's renewhopenow.org, and you'll see on there, there's a place for you to submit and let us know that you're interested in having, running a Live Life, Give Life event.
Perfect. I'll link that in the show notes as well, because I'm sure we'll have some people that are excited about making a difference in this arena. You can't hear these stories and not be touched by them. You really
Right.
can't. You really can't.
Absolutely.
Anything last that you want to share with anybody listening today about this really important topic, Chad?
I always say that trafficking is a thing that once you look at it, you can't look away.
Mm-hmm.
Once you see it, you can't look away. So I guess the last thing that I would just leave you with is take another step. Take one more step to get engaged in this issue, because this is a real issue, and it goes to the heart. If you're a believer, it goes to the heart of God, right?
Yeah.
That we take care of people who have been overly burdened by life here on earth,
Yeah.
and that we take care of them, and that we give them the light of Christ. And, Renew Hope is a faith-based organization. We believe the best thing that we can do is to introduce them to the person of Jesus Christ, the healer.
Yeah.
And that's where real, true, deep healing happens. But we also provide them with all of the other resources that the rest of the world knows is helpful for those types of things. But just get engaged, find some way to get engaged, make it small, some small step that you can get engaged. If you can't run a Live Life, Give Life event, just ask us when the next one is, and maybe you'll be interested in just participating in one. If you can have one of those stage events, which are just short, small little presentations that you can have in your home or in your neighborhood, in your church. Just like us on Facebook, or any of that kind of stuff that helps raise awareness to the issue of trafficking here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
Do that, and you will find yourself getting a little bit more and more and more engaged in the issue of trafficking.
I love that. I love that. Well, Chad, I want to thank you for coming on and sharing with today, but mostly I want to thank you for what you're doing. Like, this job is not for the faint of heart.
Right.
And it takes somebody really special to be able to work in this area. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for just the mission that you are on with your team. I'm so thankful that there's people out there like you that just care this much. And I just pray that this just brings a flood of just support for what you're doing.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I mean, Jen, this was great. It's been a while. We've been trying to make this connection and make this thing happen. So I know it's been brewing for a while, but everything that you're doing to just help other folks get their message out, and, your great message too. So just thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
It takes a lot of different angles to try to make an impact on this world. So it's great to have great people.
It does. All right, thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.